Sagan.
Thanks for joining us today. This topic's going to be about gun regulation. In particular, what kind of spurred this topic's going to be the new executive order from Obama. So guns are a hot topic. They always have been. They more than likely always will be. It is something that we should all come together on. What I want to talk about are a few points here. I got into a pretty long debate with somebody that we clearly had very different views on this. A lot of my family has different views than me on this. I seem to be swimming upstream with this. But in terms of this new law, I want to go over a few points. So first of all, a very common thing to bring up is criminals don't obey the law. And that's true. They're criminals because they don't obey the law. The law is there to obviously give us a guideline on what we find acceptable and not, and to provide punishments should we do these things that we have decided not to do. If that's the case, if we're going to go with that criminals don't obey the law, then why bother? Why do we even have laws in the first place? If they're not going to obey them, why do we have them? It's a silly thing to use that as a basis of your argument that, well, the criminals are criminals because they don't care what the law says. Sure, true. We still need the laws. We still need the rules. We still need to have the guidelines that everybody else can follow. And then we'll deal with the criminals as they come along. So then again, on another point then is, should felons have guns? When it comes to the Second Amendment, I'm sure if you're listening to this, you probably know exactly what it says. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So why can't felons have guns then? They've paid their dues to society. Why shouldn't they be allowed to have guns on that basis? The reason being is because we've decided collectively that that's not a good idea for whatever reason. I disagree with it to some extent. There are exceptions, I think, but I don't think that just because you've committed a felony does that automatically mean that you do not get to own a gun. I would argue for if you've committed a violent crime, if you've committed a crime with a gun, if you've committed a sexual crime, then those would, and others, just because I haven't labeled it doesn't mean it's not there. But those in particular, I think, would be the best examples of reasons why not to, or why to take that right away. But the problem with that is that it doesn't really exist with any of the other rights. If you've committed a crime and are now labeled a felon, you do not lose your freedom of speech. You do not lose the right to be represented. You do not lose the right to not incriminate yourself. You don't lose really any other right with the exception of, say, freedom. Your freedom to not be inside prison or jail. But with that being said, all the other rights are still there. You have the freedom of religion. You would have probably the right to assemble, but the availability would more than likely be extremely limited. So what I'm getting at is that you don't really lose any of the rights. And so with that being said, why is the guns any different? And I'm not here to debate, and I'm not going to debate whether or not felons should have guns, but it is a point. Does that second part of the sentence also mean any gun to anyone, anywhere? Well, maybe not. My personal opinion is no. It doesn't mean any gun, anyone, anywhere. I do think that fully automatic weapons should be more available to the public. There isn't. I don't feel like there's a good reason why they're not, but that is what's passed through legislation. So, these are the laws that I have to obey, and I know that you can still get them. It's just a little more difficult. So, with that being said, if we're going to accept that and not throw a fit about that daily, why can't we accept that the new executive order is defining who is a dealer? And it's really setting a numerical value on it. One of the portions of the new executive order, and I'll put a link in the description below for to exactly where it is at whitehouse.gov. It does say in there that if you sell more than 50 guns in a calendar year, then you would have to apply to be a dealer. That makes sense to me. 50 guns is a lot of guns. 50 guns is a lot of guns to not be doing background checks on, I think. 50 guns is probably a lot more guns than most Americans have. I don't know what the average is. If I had to guess, I'd say the average is probably 2 or 3 per family. But, across the entire population. All those guns going out without background checks should be concerning if we've accepted also that background checks are legal. As far as I'm to read it, is that the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. By you having to do a background check that does not stop you, technically, from owning a gun, except in the case as if you're a felon or some other reason barring you from owning guns. So is that a true infringement, that if you're a felon, you can't own guns? Maybe, maybe not. Depends on who you are and how you feel about that. The next idea is that more gun regulation does not make a safer city. It does not reduce the amount of gun violence in a particular city. If you look at the data, and you can't just look at one source, you have to look at them all because they'll word the same data differently, and so you'll get a different idea between the several different news media outlets. So you really have to look at them all together, all the different ones that are available, and what you'll find is that it's quite inconclusive overall. There are states that have high gun regulation. There are states that have very low gun regulation. And there's not a direct link between states that have a lot of regulation versus the ones that don't. If you take California, for instance, per capita has a relatively low gun violence rate, yet a very high gun regulation score. States like Illinois, a lot of gun regulation, a lot of gun violence. Michigan, same case. You look at cities like New Orleans, right? Gun regulation, high crime. Louisiana as a state, though, has very lax gun regulations. New York, New York City on its own has very high gun violence, and New York State as a whole, New York City particularly, has a lot of gun regulation. So it's not exactly tit for tat here that if you have high regulation, it does not mean that you're going to have low gun crime. There are other states that are kind of across the board, and maybe they're in the middle of everything. Illinois is actually, Chicago is actually one of them. That if you blend the numbers for per capita and age adjust, they're actually below the levels for crime. They're below the national average. So with that being said, so here's some examples of some states that have high gun regulation and relatively low gun violence. So I'm looking at a chart here that shows the relation between gun regulation and gun violence. And towards the top, it shows states with the fewest gun-related deaths. These are Hawaii, Massachusetts, New York, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New Jersey. Gun-related deaths per 100,000 by state, 2013, age adjusted. So Hawaii is 2.5. If you look at the way that this chart shows regulation, it has a few questions. Is a permit or license required to purchase handgun? Yes. Are background checks on handguns extended to private sales? Yes. These are all for Hawaii. Are handgun owners required to register or report their weapons? Yes. Does some form of stand your ground law exist beyond castle doctrine? No. How difficult is it generally to obtain a concealed carry permit? Difficult. How difficult is it generally to obtain an open carry permit? Difficult. Is there a waiting period to obtain handguns? 14 days. Again, this is all Hawaii. So I'll put this link up as well so you can look at this chart. So there's 6 states there that have high regulation and low gun violence. Then on the other end of the spectrum here, it says states with the most gun-related deaths. These are Wyoming, Arkansas, Alaska, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Alaska. These states here, starting at Wyoming, 16.7, Arkansas, 16.7, Alabama, 17.5, Mississippi, 17.7, Louisiana, 19.1, Alaska, 19.8. And you go through the same questions as before. Most of them is like, is a permit required? No. Background checks on handguns, private sales? No. Handgun owners required to register? No. Form of stand your ground exists? No. On Wyoming, the rest of the states are yes. Concealed carry permits. No permit required for Wyoming. You can conceal any whichever way you want. I know that's also the case for Arizona right now. The others are moderate, easy, or Alaska. No permit required. Open carry. No permit required across the board. Waiting period. No waiting period across the board. Now, I also agree with a no waiting period. If you pass the FBI's background check, why should you have to wait? In terms of open carry, I don't think there should be any permit required anywhere to open carry, except for federal buildings. Federal buildings, schools would be a debatable one. I think that the teachers could be armed, but I would not allow visitors to come in armed. I don't think that'd be an appropriate scenario. And full disclosure here on this chart, it also does, these figures include homicides, suicides, accidental gun deaths, and firearm discharge with undetermined intent. Legal interventions involving firearms are excluded. So that would mean like police shootings, or whatever, I guess. So anyways, so you've got some charts that'll show that there's really no correlation. The sources that I'm using, you get a bias no matter where you go. Readers will say, oh, well, this one has a liberal bias, or this one has a conservative bias, or whatever. There are a few out there that really try to be in the middle. And what I do is I generally watch the reputation of somebody, a particular news media outlet, as best as I can, and I can take their information, because even though if someone is known to put out liberal stuff, that doesn't mean that article is going to have nothing but liberal bias. I read a PBS one, which has been known to be really centrist, and their comments about the new executive order said that if you sell a few guns, then you'll have to be a dealer. That's not the case. It's 50. And, I'm no mathematician, but 50 is not a few. There's a big freaking difference between 50 and a few. If you're selling a few, then I would say the executive order doesn't need to be there. If you're selling 50, you need to be a dealer. It's clear that you're in the business of selling guns. So when it comes to people arguing the point of regulation does not equal safety, I can understand that. It's not a clear-cut decision on that. But when you say that if you make regulation, then your city becomes less safe, that is also not a true statement. And the statement of criminals are going to commit crimes no matter what your laws are, again, that's not really a valid argument. That doesn't help anywhere. So unless you're rooting for pure anarchy, you really shouldn't even be using that as a basis of argument. I am going to wrap this up. I just don't want to make this thing huge. And I don't want to make it too broad by talking about all the other little aspects about it. Thank you for watching this video. I know it's a hot topic for a lot, but I appreciate you watching the video all the way through. And if you do like it, please press the like button and subscribe. I'm trying to do videos every Friday. And if you have any topic suggestions, please leave a comment below. Other than that, you guys have a wonderful day. Thank you.